So we had some interesting experiences with the Russians. They were obviously supporting Assad. They were targeting ISIS and the Syrian rebels that were trying to overthrow Assad as well. So in some ways we had goals that were lined up, and then in some ways we didn't. And from the aircrew perspective, one of the things that we tried to become very familiar with was what was the administration's stance on Russia, and what was their strategy in the Middle East? What was Russia's strategy in the Middle East, and then what was the U.S.'s strategy in the Middle East, and then how exactly did the administration, the DoD, want us to handle our interactions with the Russians? And we often wondered what kind of back channel stuff was going on with the Russians, and how we were coordinating things or deconflicting things and stuff. I think honestly, once everything's out there, I don't really think, and should have caveat this up front with everything I'm saying is that, my view is not the DoD's view. So everything that I'm saying is completely of my own opinion, as it were. So it's not an official position at all. I should have said that up front, but what I got out of it and what I kind of believed was that I didn't think Russia was interested in starting World War III in Syria, and I don't think the U.S. was interested in starting World War III. But I do think that there were some escalation pathways that we didn't quite acknowledge at the time, and we didn't see. And part of the challenge for aircrew specifically was trying to identify escalation pathways and then de-escalate things to the maximum extent we could while preserving our own forces and not exposing them to unnecessary risk. So it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier said than done. I guess I would throw the analogy out there of if you go into a bar and somebody's shit talking you into a bar, it's, do you want to get into a fight in the bar? Or do you want to try to de-escalate things? Is it worth it? So there's 100 other variables, right, that are going on there. And that was essentially how Syria was. There was a ton of different variables. Our mission was pretty specific, that we were countering ISIS, and we were trying to work through ISIS and then try to restabilize Iraq. So if things escalated with the Russians, that would naturally take away from our mission with ISIS. And a lot of it was unnecessary, I don't know. We just didn't really. We were going to protect the Americans at all costs that we could, but at the same time, we got to figure out how to kind of pat our head and rub our belly at the same time when it comes to how do you de-escalate things, and then how do you protect Americans, which, like I was telling you before, a lot of people will shit talk the Syrian scenario as, well, that's not, the World War II scenario where it's super non-permissive, whatever. Syria is very permissive and it's easy and it's just CAS and all this sort of stuff. But realistically, the decisions that guys were making were extremely complicated decisions on whether or not to shoot, down a Russian or shoot down a Syrian or whatever it was. And a lot of those were not clear cut at all. They were extremely gray decisions, and they had tremendous consequences that went with them. But at the end of the day, most of the aircrew were, adamant about protecting the guys on the ground, and they would do it as much as the rules of engagement would allow them to. And then there was a sort of a component of the nature of the fight, and having Americans in Syria was exposing those Americans to a level of risk that you couldn't entirely mitigate. There were certain scenarios that were going on where you couldn't mitigate risk at all times. So that was more on the ground commanders within Syria to, if they wanted to buy that risk or not, if it was worth the objective in taking ISIS. And from when we got there in 2017, the way that the war was going at that point was they were very adamant about, we want to make sure that we kill out ISIS. Like, let's not, screw around. Let's just do it and get it over with. So that's why we ramped up strikes, and that's why things became a little bit more focused on just making it happen, as it were. So I don't know if that danced around the question or answered it at all.
It does.
Okay. Yeah. The Russians were, the Russians were an interesting group of cats for sure. We had a rough deconfliction with them in 2017 of basically like, you guys stay on this side of the river, we'll stay on this side of the river. And then that never really got, it wasn't really that solid. So we had a couple instances with the Russians where we thought that they were escalating things by dropping extremely close to U.S. positions. And we weren't sure if they had bad intel or whatever it was. And we tried to mitigate it to the max extent that we could. We ended up doing that against a Su-34 that dropped really close to a U.S. position. And we ended up doing this thing called a headbutt, which is, flying in front of them and dropping out some flares. And he seemed to think, what the hell are you guys doing? And all these flares are coming out. And, oh, by the way, this was at nighttime and semi in the clouds. It was broken weather, and there's some 57 millimeter coming out from Daz at the same time. They were shooting at the Russians and us, and ISIS was, and it was a big cluster. But so things got kind of out of hand in one of those scenarios, and we ended up merging, getting pretty close to a Su-30 at night, which was, another interesting thing. But the whole idea really was that the air crew needed to try to figure out a way to de-escalate the situation. The last thing we wanted to do was, the Russians go full court press and start shooting down some of our AFSOC guys, and we have to do CSAR over or combat search and rescue over Deir ez-Zor, an ISIS country, or whatever it is. We didn't want the situation to get worse, and at the same time, we weren't really interested in war with the Russians, and same kind of went with the Syrians. Despite that whole Hornet shoot down of the fitter in North Syria, which was around about the same time as our shoot down of the Iranian Shaheed. But it was, how much do you want to escalate with these guys, and is it really worth it, in the end? So.
The Russians have got a very, it's sort of admirable in a way that they do what they want to do. That's how it appears to me, at least. And there's that video of the Su-27 almost ramming into an F-15C. I think it was a Lakenheath Eagle, just super aggressive. Is there a part of you? Because when I think about that, I think, well, how would I respond to that? And I think, thank goodness, I'm not an Eagle pilot, because I probably wouldn't have responded to it in the right way. But is there a part of you that feels like, so okay, you've got the rules, you know what you can and can't do, and you've already explained that you don't want to escalate because that could result in some other friendlies getting shot down and so on and so forth. But is there a part of you that thinks, well, actually, I just also have to maintain the higher ground, be the maturer of the two, or does the sort of type A sort of personality kick in, and you just think, well, fuck it, I just want to shoot them down?
Well, who doesn't want to be the first to shoot down a flanker or whatever? And I think the flanker pilots would probably say the same about us to that point. But there is a level of professionalism that comes with fighter pilots. Let's say that you're an officer in the art of war, first and foremost, and despite what your ambitions are or whatever, and I just want to go out and, shoot this guy down or whatever. I don't know. That never really crossed my mind too much. I guess you could call it you have to have very controlled aggression. And that's one of the discipline things about being a fighter pilot, one of the mottos of the 482nd, which was, my squadron during the deployment, was violent, tactical, and disciplined. And it was, you had to be very disciplined about what you're going to do. And that takes it. It's easier said than done sometimes. And sometimes you get caught up in the moment and you don't know what he's going to do. And, he's got you in a weapons engagement zone. And, if you don't shoot first, you're going to die. And, all these thoughts will go through your mind. But at the same time, you have to just, bitch, be cool. Just slow down, chill out, just figure out, okay, I need to get leverage on the situation, or maybe I can de-escalate this somehow. Especially, and Russia's a little bit of a different animal, that we're not at war with Russia, right? So the U.S., yeah, sure, we were staring across, at the Soviet Union for quite a long time, but we're not at war with Russia, yet or whatever. And we have to be very tempered to say that, is this small little action in, the Baltics gonna, or, with a B-52 or a C model or, whatever it is this really what I want to, sell the farm for, as it were? So one thing that I've been very impressed with, at least, was the level of professionalism from pilots, and especially in the RAF and then in the United States Air Force, of a level of professionalism walking out the door and saying that these situations that we get into are what we thrive in, and we can handle the stress in a very cool, calm, and collected manner, and then be able to, prosecute whenever we need to. So as soon as that, guy's declared hostile, we can go out and we can win with no problem. But up until that point, though, we have to have a level of discipline that, tempers what's going on. And some guys will call bullshit on that. And, I'm aggressive. If he ever, spiked into me, I'd turn around and I'd shoot him or whatever. And like, okay, sweet, so.
What about the sort of the bomb dropping scenario, though? So you've got somebody who is potentially going to drop a bomb on an American or a coalition sort of ground unit. Do you just call them up? Can you just use the guard frequency and just say, hey, do you guys know you're going to drop something that could kill some Americans? How do you actually, other than the headbutt, how do you make sure that, because I think you already mentioned maybe they've got some bad intel or whatever. How do you, there must be a way of saying to them, hey, don't do it.
Yep. The guard frequency is normally the first, if they're up on guard, then we can try. I don't speak very good Russian, so I don't know if they would understand what I'm saying. And we'll leave it to AWACS. Normally they, throw out the guard warnings on there to give them a chance to be able to say, oh, yep, we messed up that or whatever, or we weren't tracking that there was a U.S. position there. We had that situation, obviously, in the south of Syria with the Iranians and the Shaheed, and then it being unmanned was a little bit easier decision to just go ahead and shoot it down when we did. And even though we weren't officially at war with Iran, and then that led to that was a kind of complicated situation, as it were. But as far as the headbutt is not a ideal tactic going out the door with at all either, because you're kind of escalating things. You're throwing, if you're throwing flares out of the jet, then he doesn't know if maybe that's a missile coming off. We have no idea. We can't really get into his head about what he's expecting. Does he see us in time? Is this just this fighter that just breaks right into him? Is he tracking that we're even there? And then you're kind of shining your ass at him because you're opening yourself up to a WES as soon as you do a headbutt, for the most part. So it's not, from every fighter pilot, is not your preferred, technique to try to de-escalate things. But at the end of the day, if they messed up to the point of, dropping on friendlies, like he's already pretty much signed up for what's going to happen next. And I thought the coalition, at least in OIR, was pretty clear about self-defense when it came to saying that, if this happens, like we're going to defend the U.S. and, we'll talk about it, in Geneva some other time, but this is what we're going to do, right now to be able to do it. So I thought that was pretty clear. Whereas, I always wondered about Afghanistan from that, the temperament in Afghanistan was completely different than what was going on in Syria. Those are two completely different places that had completely different, really kind of a whole different outlook on the rules of engagement and stuff. So yeah, that was pretty interesting.
If you enjoyed this clip and want more, you can go to 10percenttrue.com, hit subscribe. You get early ad-free access to all my content. Appreciate your support.